Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, June 13th, 2012. We're here at the Library of Congress. My name is Tom Weiner, and I'm conducting an interview for the Veterans History Project with Jim Kimsey. Jim, welcome to the library.
Thank you, Tom.
Just tell us for the record what branch of service you were in, what your highest rank was, and what war you served in.
I was in the infantry. When I left the Army, I was a major. I was involved in the invasion of the Dominican Republic, and I had subsequently 2 tours in Vietnam.
Okay, good. Now let's just start from the beginning of your life. Where were you born, and what was your family life like when you were a youngster?
I was born in Walter Reed Hospital. My father was a sergeant in World War I, and we lived in a kind of a hard-scrabble part of South Arlington when I grew up. So I was born in humble beginnings, you might say.
Your father was a career officer?
He was. He was a career enlisted man. He retired as a sergeant.
And you grew up in Arlington, went to school there?
I did.
Okay. And that was elementary school and high school?
I went to elementary school in North Arlington, which was a little bit of a hike. And then I went to high school. I went to 2 high schools. I went to Gonzaga High School for 3 years and 1 month. And I was thrown out of high school at my senior year.
You were thrown out of high school your senior year?
In Gonzaga.
Do you want to talk about that?
It's been well.
Well, just for our record, I think it would be interesting for you to say.
I was probably in the later years. I was probably decent. I had a scholarship to Gonzaga, or otherwise I wouldn't have been able to go there. And I was deemed to be unruly and obstreperous in my later years, and the headmaster finally threw me out in my senior year. My little Irish Catholic mother was quite distraught with this, and after I've worked a little while as a doorman at a seedy place in 14th and I Street called Rand's, my mother pleaded with the guy that ran St. John's, which was a military school at the time, to let me come back. And the fellow that ran St. John's, bless his heart, saved me by allowing me to take an exam, and if I did well, he would let me back in. I was the only kid that, went the last few months of my senior year without a uniform. I just wore a sport coat. So I graduated from St. John's, and then 25 years later, at my 25th reunion, at both high schools, they got the fellow that threw me out, the head of Gonzaga, to come back and present me with my backdated diploma from Gonzaga. So I'm the only person in the multi-hundred-year history of both high schools that has contemporaneously dated diplomas from both high schools. And then, as a consequence, they both have Kimsey Technology Centers, which must be very confusing to the kids because they're crosstown rivals.
That's great. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing that. After high school, where did you go?
I got a scholarship to Georgetown, and I was, at the time, it was a school for rich white boys.
Mm-hmm. Now, what year are we talking about here?
But I wasn't rich.
What year are we talking about here?
This is 58, 59. I graduated from high school in 1957, so actually it was the fall of 57 and 58 that I was a freshman at Georgetown. Yeah. And then inspired by the movie The Long Gray Line and television programs that were on every week, West Point, Minneapolis, it looked like a really cool place to go, and I thought that being dressed up in those uniforms would get me more dates, and that turned out they wouldn't let you out. It was an all-male institution, so that my strategy, I think I could have done well if they'd let me out, but they didn't. It didn't work out for you then, what you planned. So many people were convinced that I would never graduate from West Point, that I was motivated, although I was not a very good cadet, to stay and graduate, which I subsequently did.
Yeah. Now, you got an appointment to West Point. How did you manage that after 1 year at Georgetown?
My little sainted mother had a sister who lived in Montana, and there was a Senator Murray from Montana that he was one of the first to do it, had an exam that whoever got the highest score he'd give an appointment to. So I took that exam, got the appointment, and Mirabile Dictu showed up.
Yeah. Now, was your father still alive at this point?
Yes.
So I take it he was very happy about this.
He was.
This move.
He was.
Yeah. Very encouraging. Was anybody else in your family, older relatives in the military?
Some of my uncles had served in World War II, but there was no career people in either side of my family that were military people, except my father.
Now, you say you succeeded at West Point in getting through, but you said you weren't a very good cadet. Could you explain why you weren't a very good cadet?
I still had some of the same qualities that got me thrown out of high school, had not yet been expunged. And West Point was the kind of school that you either discipline yourself or you weren't going to graduate.
Yeah.
So the shame of not being able to graduate from West Point, when so many people thought that I would never graduate, and returning back to Washington was an overwhelming motivation to me to at least do enough to get by and not do anything so egregious as to get thrown out.
So you were kind of, in a way, walking a kind of fine line between being yourself and yet succeeding, getting through.
Well, when they made me a distinguished graduate, I was overwhelmed with the delicious irony of being in the accompaniment of people like MacArthur and Eisenhower and other notable people. In fact, there's a building with my name on it at West Point, which must make MacArthur and Eisenhower roll over in their grave.
What's the building? What's in the building?
Kimsey Athletic Center.
I see. Okay. Were you participate in athletics while you were there?
I was sat on the bench or was in the hospital most of the time. But yes,
for
football? Not notably, for football. Yeah. And then I boxed as well.
Okay. So when you got commissioned from West Point, what was your next move? You were obviously committed to serve in the Army.
I had a 4-year commitment. We were the first class to have a 4-year commitment. I think they have a 5-year commitment now. And it's explained that I thought I'd be able to, because I had medical issues with my shoulder because of football and boxing, that maybe I wouldn't have to serve. And so I told them I wanted to be an airborne ranger, or I didn't want to go in. And I was thinking they would say, okay, well then you don't have to go in. And they said, okay, much to my surprise, we'll make you an airborne ranger. I said, oh, okay. And
they called your bluff.
Well, as it turned out, lucky for me, because I was one of the few people in my class that enjoyed Ranger School and enjoyed the Army and stayed in 8 years.
Right. So at this point, the discipline of the Army versus your kind of wild hair youth, it was starting to be more. You were hewing to the discipline of the Army, understanding that better.
There was being a cadet at West Point and being a lieutenant in the Army are two different dynamics. In the Army, I was responsible for a platoon of 40 men. We had stuff that we had to do, so that responsibility inured a sense of duty and discipline that I had probably learned, although at the time I didn't understand it, at West Point. And I enjoyed the Army. Had they been another war, I'd have stayed in. I just enjoyed it.
Yeah. Now you mentioned that you were participated in the Dominican Republic action. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I was just there recently. I went down with the head of the Inter-American Development Bank to visit. You'll see why I'm telling you this in a minute.
Sure.
And we were going to see the damage the earthquake had done in Haiti. We went there the day after the earthquake, 2 days after the earthquake. And we had to, I couldn't take my plane into Port-au-Prince because of the damage, so we had to land in Santo Domingo and stay in Santo Domingo and helicopter back and forth. And while we were there, we had dinner with the president of the Dominican Republic, Leonel Fernandez. And during dinner he said, "So, Mr. Kimsey, have you ever been to my country before?" And I said, "Yes, I was the company commander of the first company of the 82nd Airborne Division to invade you in 1965, thinking he'd be amused by that. But instead he got very angry and said, "You know what you did? You backed that wacko right-wing general Weston E. Weston, and you persecuted our country's hero, Camaño." And I said, "Ooh, I better change the subject." And so I started to talk about Chavez a little bit, and get his opinion on Chavez. And he said, "Well, Senor Chavez is a genius at knowing what to be against, but he's not so good at knowing what to be for." So we ended up having a relatively civilized conversation. But in fact, the 82nd Airborne, in which I was then a company commander, in 1965, invaded because President Johnson thought that Camaño, this guy we were after, was a communist. Since then, President Fernandez has sent me a pastiche of pictures of American soldiers menacing poor Dominicans, and up at the top a picture of Camaño looking very heroic. And I put it up, hung it in my house, along with a picture of myself and the President next to it, because I thought that was kind of amusing.
How long were you in the Dominican Republic during this action?
We were there, the U.S. was there for a year or so. I was there for a couple of months. And then I had to come back because I was being deployed sent to Vietnam. I had orders already to go to Vietnam.
Yeah. So what did you do while you were in the Dominican Republic? What was
the action?
What was the 82nd doing? What were their duties?
We were sent to divide the city of Santo Domingo into two and back Camaño and his rebel forces up against the river. And my company was the first company on the ground, and we spearheaded and there was not a lot of, it wasn't heavy combat. It was the first combat I'd ever seen, and I did get a couple of guys wounded, but it was not heavy combat. And it was relatively easy.
There were no people killed on the U.S. Army side? There was?
Oh, in the U.S. side? Sure.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But not in your unit?
No, I never had anybody killed. I had a few guys wounded, but I never had anybody killed.
Yeah. So did your training at West Point prepare you for this, or was there, I mean, what the run-up to this must have been that you guys, they didn't just flip a switch and say one day, "Hey, you're going to the Dominican Republic tomorrow."
Yes,
there must have been some kind of training.
No, it was exactly like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we, when this thing boiled up, that's too long of a story for you to record. I don't have the time to sit here and tell you.
Sure.
But we had jumped, and not in preparation for this, I think more coincidentally, because I don't think we're smart enough to anticipate these things and execute them that well. But we had jumped on the little island Vieques off Puerto Rico a few months prior to that, and my unit did that and did some exercises. They weren't similar kinds of exercises to those which they later performed in the Dominican Republic. But we thought we were going to jump on Santo Domingo, on San Isidro Airfield, which is the airfield right outside Santo Domingo. And when we were in the barracks and on alert, and it just a coincidence that my unit happened to be on alert that particular day, and I got briefed by the brigade commander at the time that we might go jumping. You know, we might have to jump on San Isidro, and here's what we're doing. But we don't know whether we're going to have to do that or not. And then I went back to the barracks, and we were all in the barracks, all the troops ready to go. And they called and said, "Wait, we're going to go to a less high alert. So that meant that, you know, people could, you know, go back to their houses and be on hours call or something like that. And I had all my platoon leaders and company people in the saying, you know, I think we're going to not, you know, we're going to be able to disperse this, calm it down a little bit. And then I got another call saying, be out in the parking lot right now. The trucks are coming to pick you up, and we're headed out.
And where were you at that time?
Fort
Where were you
Bragg.
stationed?
Fort Bragg.
Yeah,
So
they were going to fly you directly
to.
to.
They were taking us down to Pope Airfield, put us on C-130s, and fly us to the Dominican Republic. And so I had to get the company, which was a big company, out in the quadrangle as it was, and get on one of those PT stands and yell, because most of these soldiers had no idea, because they had never been briefed. Because I told the platoon leaders and everybody, you know, okay, we're going to, but I hadn't given them a briefing. All I've said was, Bill, we're on alert. I went up, got, you know, the briefing, got a call saying, so the briefing had never been dispersed. And so I had to get all these kids out while these big trucks were lumbering around, and I'm on a PT stand yelling at them, you know, we're going to jump on the Dominican Republic. We assemble at the northeast corner, and of course the kids were looking and said, what the hell is he talking about? Where the hell is the Dominican Republic? Well, how are we going to know what the northeast corner of the... So my company got divided in two sections, you know, because one plane couldn't hold the whole company. And I was in one section, and I knew how long the flight was to the Dominican Republic, and I realized that, you know, and I told the load master, the pilots, I said, you got to give me at least 2 hours notice before we jump, because all the chutes were packed in the back of the plane. I had all the kids, and we had to pass out the ammunition and all, and the chutes were in the back of the, you know, in the ramp. So you got to give me 2 hours to get everybody, you know, get the ammo dispersed and put everybody in a chute and get ready to jump. So we were headed and got past the 2 hour point. So everybody kind of dozed off, and then we started, the second part of the plan they had mentioned was we might land at Ramey Air Force Base and stage if we're going to jump. So, you know, we won't just go and jump.
Yeah.
We just go to Ramey Air Force Base first. So we started to lose altitude, and I had pumped to the loadmaster saying, we're going to Ramey Air Force Base, right? And the pilot was, I think, in almost direct contact with the White House during this whole operation.
Wow.
And the loadmaster's eyes got real big. He said, no, we're landing at San Ysidro Airfield. And I said, what? So my plane landed, and we, you know, we're throwing the ammo out on the landing strip. We're throwing the guys off the plane, and the plane never stopped. It just put the ramp down, and it, you know, taxied, and it was still moving while we were getting everybody off of it, and then it just, as soon as everybody was off, it took off.
Is this in daylight?
No, it was at night.
At night.
And so now I'm got a company, half of which is strung out on the landing strip. Ammo is in piles every which way, and these kids, you know, are starting to load their rifles because they don't know what the hell's going on anyway. And I'm just thinking, if somebody speaks Spanish, man, I'm going to have a firefight here right in my own company, because they don't know what they're doing. So I kind of rolled them all up. We managed to get them all collected and up in the north, you know, one rallying point, and then daylight came, and the next danger was that they started heavy dropping, you know, the big stuff on the same place. So you had to look up and make sure you weren't under one of those big howitzers or something in trucks when it fell on you.
Oh.
So that all got sorted out, and it was rather chaotic, you might say.
So there was no resistance? Because
no,
it was the element of surprise?
They had people that had radioed back that said the airfield is secure.
Oh, I see.
And we could land, because some government forces Wesson's forces who we were supporting had secured the airfield. They said they had a couple of ragtag guys on there fighting, but they didn't have, but Camaño's guys weren't there, so we could land. And so it was somewhat disorganized, you might say.
Wow. You were the first Americans in?
Yes. Now the Marines came in another part of the city. They landed, but I think we were there first. And then we made they all got coordinated, and then we made the drive down the center of the city and boxed Camaño in, and then I had to get on a plane and come back to Fort Bragg and get ready to go to Vietnam.
So your men were still there after you left for how long?
Well, depending on.
Oh, okay. So they were rotating people.
They were rotating in and back. They don't now. They have a better system of a unit typically stays together longer, and you don't get rotated out individually like they used to.
Okay. So you were called back and to go to Vietnam. Now, what year is this?
1965.
So it's just 65.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you know where you were going to go in Vietnam, or did you just know you were going to?
No, I knew I was going to be an advisor, and that's really all I knew. And then I'm not sure my orders said which corps I was going to. Vietnam, the South Vietnam was divided into 4 corps by us and the French prior to that. And I Corps was the northernmost corps, and I think I must have known I was going to I Corps. And then when I got into Saigon, I don't remember how the orders came down specifically, but ultimately I flew up to Quang Ngai province, and I was going to be in a little district because I was still a first lieutenant, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was. And I have to go back and read. It all becomes a blur after a while. But I got into Quang Ngai, and they assigned me to a local district as an assistant in this local district. And then and I was there for a little bit. It was fairly tame and quiet. And then we were listening on the radio, and we listened to a place called Duc Pho, which was at the southern end of that province, get overrun, which is just north of Tu Corps, which in the Nha Drang Valley, which was a nasty place. Yeah. And they got totally overrun, and the guy that was running, a guy named Ronald Rod from New Orleans, he and his team were killed. So they grabbed me and said, we're going to put together a team, a ragtag team, and we're going to send you back in there to establish an American presence. So
you went from being an advisor very quickly to somebody out in the field,
so
confronting the enemy.
I had a team to take to Duc Pho. Well, the main military force were a ragtag bunch of what they call regional force, popular force soldiers, which weren't not much of a match against the Viet Cong. But there's lots of stories surrounding all of these things. But so I went into Duc Pho and managed to, kind of figure the situation out.
So you saw more action right away there than you expected.
Oh God, yeah. No, I think I was there a year, and a little under a year, and I never had a day go by that somebody didn't shoot at me. And for one reason or another. And
so were you out in the field most of the time you were there, or did you get to come back to?
Well, I mean, I'd go back for R&R, or you get a week for rest and relaxation. And
what was the rotation time like? I mean,
well, you were supposed to be in the field for 6 months, and then back in a staff position somewhere for 6 months. In my case, this is so long of a story. My predecessor had talked about the kids in Duc Pho being orphans, and many of which we created. And it's probably still today one of the worst places in Vietnam. I went back there in '72 and got arrested.
How did you get
That's
arrested?
another story. But the Ronald Rod had, Major Rod, I guess he got promoted to, had told his people in New Orleans about these little orphans, and Archbishop Hannon, Phil Hannon, who used to be from Washington, D.C., was the Archbishop of New Orleans. And they collected a lot of money to build an orphanage in Ronald Rod's name to take care of these poor kids. Well, I found out about this. It was actually a story in Time magazine about it, and decided that orphanage needed to be built in Duck Bow. Well, they were going to build it in Saigon or Da Nang, but I said, no, it's got to be in Duck Bow. For self-serving reasons, because I figured if the orphanage was in Duck Bow and it was getting all this publicity, they'd have to send me troops to, to help protect it. Because right now I had no troops. The Marines, the first cab would not come across the border up into my area from 2 Corps, and the Marines were spread so thin they would never get down to Duck Bow. So I had nobody but these little ragtags to fight with. So I raised so much hell and said, I'm going to go to the media, and if you're breaking faith with Ronald Rod and and a lot of this was done through Catholic Relief Services, who was collecting the money and doing all that. And so they said, all right, Kimsey, fine, we'll give you the money and you build the orphanage. So that's an interesting challenge, Duck Bow. So we had learned some stuff at West Point about this kind of thing. So you had to, draw the plans for the orphanage. You had to find locals to build it, and that was not an easy undertaking. So we finally got that all done. And I said, now you got to send me some people to run the orphanage. And they said, well, nobody's going to come to Duck Bow. And I, once again, just raised so much hell. And this was now, I'm dealing with Catholic Relief Services.
Yeah.
And I said, you better send me somebody, or if you don't, I know there's a Buddhist temple a few clicks down the road. I'm going to go down and turn the orphanage and the money over to the Buddhists. And the guy said, one of the priests says, well, you'll get excommunicated if you do that. And I said, really? I said, is that like a little cute ceremony in Rome that I get to go to? How's that work? So they realized they were dealing with an incorrigible guy. Yeah. So one day at dusk, a helicopter lands, and these 4 little nuns get off the helicopter, Vietnamese nuns, and they're looking like, the flying nun outfits with the black and white stuff. And their eyes were big as saucers. They were just never been out of a big city, and never mind a place like this. So I took them over to the orphanage and, settled them in, and so, which is right next to my compound. And that night we got mortared, which was a normal nocturnal experience, and tracers were flying around a little bit. And the mother had a mother superior, a cook, a teacher, and a nurse with the 4 nuns. And the mother superior came over to my door, my hooch, and I was thinking, I immediately assumed that she wanted me to get him a helicopter to get him out of there. And I said, yes, sister, what can I do for you? And she said, come with me. And she took me over to the orphanage, and she had a punch list. It was all night long. She was making a list of the deficiencies, the assumption that I had to fix these things. Here's a crack here, and here's something here. And I'm like, I think I misjudged these nuns. Now, those nuns, well, 3 of them are dead, 1 of them's still alive, still have managed to track me down below these many years, almost 50 years, to support the orphanage.
Yeah. And in the orphanage is still
it's
there?
It's not in that building, because when the communists came down Route 1 in 1975, the nuns and the kids went to Saigon. I had a plane that I thought to get them out. I had a place in Vermont that would take them. And then some guy Tonson at Airport gave my plane, and I had arranged for this to somebody else, and they never got out, which is probably just as well as it turns out. And now they're in Quinyon, and I've been back to see them a couple times.
Yeah. So it's been almost a 50-year establishment.
Yeah, it was built late 65, 66.
Yeah. So, what else besides building an orphanage and holding off the enemy was going on while you were there on the first tour?
Well, I was in charge of 100,000 people in about 100 square miles, and so I spent as much time as I could, going around the area, which I couldn't go very far with that. I didn't have the forces to do that. And the Marines finally ran the operation called Double Eagle, one of the prongs of which was through my district, and for the first time, and my tour, the only time, now that I think back, that I could travel freely around my district without getting shot at all the time. And yet, when I was up somewhere and I was coming back, and they, Viet Cong, obviously saw me flitting around and ambushed me. And by my presence here, you'll figure out that I got back. I got out of it all right.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting tour. Because of the orphanage, requested that I stay in Duc Pho rather than come back and get a staff job. And I figured if I'm going to be there, I'd rather do that. And,
so did you request a second tour, or were you ordered to have a second tour?
No, I did request the first one because I figured we're fighting a bunch of ragtags, going to be over before I get there, so I got to hurry up. I didn't call that one correctly, but no, the second tour, in between tours, I was assigned to Fort Lewis, Washington, which is probably the nicest, most pleasant time I had in the Army, and I had a real lesson in power vacuum, so I ended up kind of running the post, and but just by volunteering to do stuff. And so when I was rotating back to Vietnam, when they were doing an out briefing with the general, he said, "Well, who runs the headquarters company?" And it's like, they said, and the other general who I directly reported to, this is a 6th Army general that came down. I don't think he'd realized that I had come to run all these things, and I had a really nice house on a lake, and at that time, 2 little boys, and take them fishing, and it was really bucolic,
So how long were you back between tours?
18 months.
Okay. And then the second tour, where did you go?
I went to Saigon initially, and
this is what, 67
well, I was
now?
First, pardon me?
What year are we in
This
now?
was 68.
68.
And I went there assigned to the 1st Cav. And when I got to Saigon, a fellow named Ace Ellis, who was a C.I.A., ran the farm at the C.I.A., asked to see me, and I went, and he asked me to be in the Phoenix program. And
explain what the Phoenix program is briefly.
I was explaining that the other day not the other day, a little while back, about what the Phoenix program was, and it was this bunch of hired assassins. And they said, "Well, that's a great name for a band." So my band, because I now do that, if you want a copy of my CD, just ask my office, they'll send you one. And it's my band is called the Hired Assassins. My stage name is Verlin Jack, and the Hired Assassins were what Phoenix was, and it was the most effective thing that we did in Vietnam. It would hire these little thugs to go out and track down Viet Cong cells and take them out in the middle of the night. And Bill Colby was running it at the time, and I worked for Colby, and my job was to go out and check on the effectiveness of it and go to various provinces. I went to 42 of 44 provinces during that year, and went out with them sometimes, and I didn't like doing that because I was bigger than they were, and was more easily spotted, even at night. But it was the first tour was a kind of worm's eye view of the war, and the second tour was a bird's eye view of the war. Because I was based in Saigon, and I worked out of the main headquarters.
I assume you were not there for the Tet Offensive?
No, I came in just after.
Just after. What was so between the two tours and separated by 18 months, you obviously saw a lot of changes in what was going on over there. Could you talk about them a little bit?
Well, when I first went in '65, I was all pumped up with, we had to fight communism, and who are these Viet Cong anyway, and we'll make short work of them. And then during the course of that tour, living with the people and understanding them a lot more, and I lived in a village that was really dirt poor. And
you learned to speak Vietnamese, is that right?
Itoi. I mean, there's very little. I mean, I did at the time. I could speak. There's not much, unless you go to a Vietnamese restaurant, there's not much cause to use it anymore. Yeah. But I wasn't fluent, but I could get by. Yeah. And
so you were living in the village in your first tour.
Yep. In the second tour, I was living in BOQ in Saigon. Yeah.
So you were really, in a way, kind of removed from the physical rigors of the war on the second tour?
Oh, no. I mean, when I was back in Saigon, I was. But, when I go out to the provinces and go out with the teams, I mean, no.
That was back to the
That
old
was even nastier than the first tour.
It was.
On the times I did that, yes. Yeah.
So you were over there in '68, and you were here before you, obviously.
68, 69.
68, 69. So you were here during the time that I think the protests really started getting going, and obviously you're in Fort Lewis, Washington, so you're not in the epicenter of that anti-war sentiment, but nevertheless you must have been aware of it. Were you, or how much did it affect you?
It was somewhat, I mean, I was aware of it. My enthusiasm for going back for a second tour was diminishing, although once I got there, the nature of the work I did kept the adrenaline moving enough that, it was interesting. And then I got to watch General Abrams and Bill Colby up front, up close and personal, and watch their frustration and watch, confirm my suspicions on how disorganized everything was, even at the top. Yeah. But I didn't become, disenfranchised or bitter, or, I was still, my personal involvement was such that, I liked it. Yeah. I enjoyed it, and I would not have gotten out of the Army if, as I said, they had started another war, because I enjoyed it. Yeah. I enjoyed the responsibility, I enjoyed the excitement, and I was a major at that time, and majors in the Army are really staff guys. Yeah. And I realized as the war was winding down, and I knew it ultimately had to, that I was going to be a staff guy in the Pentagon, and I could think of no worse thing to do with my life than that. And now I'm on the Defense Business Board, and I go over there and meetings, and I come out just with a big smile on my face, and I don't have to work at that place. Yeah. But so I, at that time, resolved that I said I'm not going to, and I'd been in 8 years. Yeah. My commitment was only 4. So, and I was a major, and
so once your second tour was up, you were pretty resolved to leave the Army?
Yes.
Okay. What was your homecoming like on the second tour? I mean, there's lots of stories the Vietnam veterans tell about negative reactions they got coming home.
Well,
do you have a story like that?
The one instance I do remember was actually on my way to my second tour. Mm-hmm. And I was going through San Francisco, and I had a friend out there, and she was, I can't remember what her job was. Anyway, she met me and took me around, and we had a drink, and I said, where's this Haight-Ashbury? that I hear so much about. She says, you want to go there? I said, yeah.
Were you in uniform?
I was.
Uh-huh.
Hence the story.
Yeah.
And if you've ever been there, at least this 68, yeah, 68, it's just 2 streets, it's a big open field. I mean, I didn't know I thought it would be like a slum. I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
And I said, this is Haight-Ashbury. And there was all these hippies laying around in the fields, around Haight-Ashbury.
Yeah.
And she said, don't get out of the car. I remember it was a little Volkswagen. She said, don't get out of the car. And I said, what do you mean don't get out of the car? Of course I'll get out of the car. And I just got out of the car and started walking around, and they were like zombies. They'd get up and they'd say, hey man, it's a baby killer. And I realized they were like zombies. They were moving a little slow, but
yeah. There
was lots of them, and there was one of me. And so I said, this is probably not a good idea. So I got back in the car and left.
Yeah.
But that was really the only visceral experience I had about, the anti-war protesters and so forth.
What kind of mentors did you have while you were in the Army? Did you have higher officers who kind of took you under their wing and taught you some things, or gave you some advice, or what have you, or were you pretty much on your own?
There's no one that I can remember that stands out. I try to learn from it's the only time in my life I ever worked for anybody. And so I'd watch what they did and how they did it, and I try to get pointers, what they did wrong, what they did, what I thought was right. And so some I liked and some I didn't think so much of.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought General Abrams was a nice guy, got badly treated.
Were you aware of, you must have been aware while you were over there in 68, 69 of the tumult that was going on over here, not just the anti-war stuff, but over the election and everything else. When Nixon was elected, do you remember any kind of effect that might have had on the troops one way or the other? Were people
well, I do remember it was in
discouraged?
68, I guess, before I knew I was going to Vietnam again, and I was out at Fort Lewis, and my wife, now ex-wife, but still good friends, was from South Africa. And she had spent my first tour with my parents in Washington, D.C., and she wanted to go back and stay with her folks in South Africa. Well, I had at that point not been to South Africa, but I'd read a lot about apartheid and all the other, I was well aware of the stuff that, the situation in South Africa.
Sure.
And so she asked me if she could go to South Africa, and I thought about it, and I said, I don't want to be over there fighting the Viet Cong and worried about you in, potentially racially strife-torn South Africa. And so she wrote her father was a South African Air Force general, and she wrote a letter back to her father saying that I decided she had to stay in Washington, D.C. Well, I think a week later, Martin Luther King was killed. So Washington, D.C. goes up in flames, much publicized.
Sure.
So the droll, sarcastic response that my father-in-law wrote, but we can try to understand why Jim wants you to stay in safe Washington, D.C. And of course, when I went to South Africa in 1970, I guess, as Alan Drury called it, a very strange society, but you sense the silent black presence, but as we all know, the transfer was bloodless and very civilized, and South Africa is not quite as peaceful now as it used to be, but it was the nicest, most civilized white. Cape Town was just about as nice a place as there was on earth at the time.
You were back here after your second tour for how long before you left the Army?
Just a matter of a couple months. I put my resignation in toward the end of my tour.
So you'd made up your mind before you even came back?
Well, I could tell, that I was a major, and I could tell the war. And as I began to understand the war was winding down,
so you didn't anticipate that you might get a third tour? Or was that not going to happen?
At that time, and I don't think my classmates stayed, were majors for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So if I had stayed in, that's exactly what happened to me. And so it, you know, it was, I had to be insistent when I put my, you know, I had to use my relationship with, you know, people like General Abrams. I said, sir, I really need to get out of the Army, you know, and I want to get out when I get, because they were assigning me, I can't remember what the assignment was, but I didn't like it. And then when they got afterwards they assigned me to Fort Belvoir. It's some rum-dum job, and but because General Abrams and I can't remember, I did ask somebody else to help Department of Army approve my resignation and not selectively retain me, because I already had 2 tours, and at that time, you know, they could see the nexus of, you know, guys that had 2 tours were not being assigned, you know, quickly reassigned to a third. Yeah. And plus the war was, we were started to draw down. Yeah. So I mean, they saw the same thing I did. Yeah.
So you're getting out. You realize that a 3rd tour isn't likely, and what you're offered instead of that is not to your liking, and you have enough time in. So you leave the Army and went 69 or 70?
Late 69.
Okay. Did you stay in touch with guys that you served with, other officers or even some of your men after you left the Army?
No. I've had a couple of them. Once I, you know, was better known as because of my business career, I had a few guys get in touch with me, but I'm not I don't get on Facebook, and I don't do it. I do that.
So the camaraderie that you felt with the Army, with the other guys you were serving with, kind of ended with your service?
Well, my classmates and I have stayed in touch a lot. Okay. I mean, we really,
well, I was wondering about that.
Yeah, we have our reunions at my house, and I see a lot of. We just had our 50th reunion, and some of them are really close friends, and we've stayed in touch. In fact, one of them is we met in the hospital when we were both plebes, and we're still. He's the Caulfield of Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers, and he's the one that mentioned to me that there was a guy starting a download company near me. That became America Online.
Well, tell us briefly.
In fact, I had 3 West Pointers at one time. Somebody asked me after we were public, said, "Well, you got 7 guys on your board, of America Online's board, and 4 of them are West Pointers. 2 of them are classmates with Al Haig and Caulfield and a guy named Jim Andrews and myself." I said, "Isn't that cronyism?" I was telling General Haig that. And he said, "Well, Uncle Jimmy, I just call it right thinking." Because only Al could.
Describe briefly what your career was like after you left the Army. Describe briefly what your career was like after you left the Army.
Well, I got out of the Army with $2,000 I'd saved, and at that point, a wife and 2 kids, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And it's too long of a story, but I used to walk around D.C. on weekends looking for real estate to buy. This was in 1970. Yeah. And the market was terrible. I didn't really appreciate how bad it was. And I came upon a little house townhouse on M Street that was for sale. And I, as I said, didn't have really any money. And this young real estate broker came over when I showed an interest, because there was nothing going on. So he had a bunch of guys who were going to build a bar, and I could put a brokerage operation upstairs. And so to shorten it up dramatically, this guy at this Home Federal Savings and Loan with no equity financed the purchase of the building, and then the guys who were going to build a bar ran out of money and couldn't finish it, and so I went back to him, and with yet no equity, refinanced it, and finished the bar. And the bar opened, and through another weird series of events, let's say a guy was selling a ticker tape machine. And he thought I was putting a brokerage firm upstairs. He wanted to sell it for that. And I said, well, there's going to be guys putting a bar in, and I flunked out. And he said, why don't you put it in the bar? And I said, that's a great idea. And all the guys could come out and drink and watch the market. And I said, you think it'll fit? So he put it up to see if it would. So I applied for a New York Stock Exchange ticker tape. And the communication division of the New York Stock Exchange sent me a rather archly worded letter turning me down. And I said, I could just picture these snotty guys up there. And I remember it was a chilly day, and I'd had a wine-filled lunch, and I came back, and the guy that wrote the letter, I called him up and I said, you know what? I've gotten your letter, and I've spent the last 5 hours with my lawyers, and we've spent a lot of money on, building this place, and pursuant to it being installed, which wasn't their fault, of course, and we're invited in half the city of Washington, and we spent millions of dollars. We're going to sue you for $20 million or whatever they are. I just, it was like, I'm just going to make him sweat. And I did it in a very official voice, like I'd really been with the lawyers. But I just thought it up as I was picking up the phone. And I expected him to hang up on me, but I said, it made me feel better. There was this long sigh. And he said, all right. Because the New York Stock Exchange was under tremendous assault. And he just didn't want any more aggravation. And I made it sound like I was really going to do it. And so we got permission. And so the bar opened, and it was the first bar in the world to have a New York Stock Exchange ticker tape. And then the Washington Star reporter came over and wanted to do a story. And he got a picture of one of my investor guys. The real estate guy was there with his wife, and she was sitting at the bar, and she just crossed her legs, and her thigh on down was visible in this picture of the ticker tape. And so the tagline on the story was "different figures behind the bar," like we'd just taken down a stripper or something and put up the New York Stock Exchange figure. So this guy calls me and insists, he says, I thought you were a nice young man. How could you do this to me? It's like, I can't control what the newspapers do. Well, they picked that up on the wire. And it was, BBC did a story. It was all over it was on TV. It was on every paper. The first bar in the United States to have a ticker tape. Well, needless to say, it did well.
Yeah. And
so I opened another one. I opened 3 exchange bars, and I opened a place called Bullfeathers up here. Yeah, and I had 5 bars ultimately. Mm-hmm.
So how did you parlay that, or how did that lead into AOL?
Well, it had nothing to do with AOL.
Okay.
I was a happy guy. I had, by that time, 3 kids. A nice house in the suburbs, and didn't have to do much because I just picked good managers and they did everything. So I was like Mr. Magoo that walked through the valley of death, came out the other side unscathed without knowing the danger I had been in. I wouldn't get back in that business for anything these days. I was just lucky because they just had legalized stand-up drinking in Washington, and bars were starting to meet, meat markets as they subsequently were called. Yeah. And I think I told you a bit of the story of my classmate calling me, Kleiner Perkins, being the biggest venture capital firm in the world, I think, and telling me about this guy that was downloading video games over the telephone in my backyard, and this guy's name was Bill von Meister. Well, he was a very smart, inventive kind of guy and a good promoter, but he couldn't run anything. And he sucked up a lot of money and venture capital and so forth, and it's another too long of a story. And I was involved at that time with starting a bank, We had started, a group of guys had started a bank out in Texas called a business bank. And then we were going to take the bank holding company public, and I got a questionnaire from the SEC. Have you ever been involved with have you ever been on a run or been on a director of a company within 2 years of its going bankrupt? I said, damn, I won't ever be able to answer no to that again, because this thing looks like it was headed, it was called control video, headed down right in the toilet.
Yeah.
So I said, I need to get out, I need to do something with this thing. And so I was trying to sell it to Apple, but Jobs and Scully were rolling around on the floor. I couldn't get their attention. And so I ended up talking to a guy at Commodore named Irving Gould, who was the chairman of Commodore at the time, which was $1 billion company and the biggest presence in the home computer market. And he had somebody in his outfit that had a scheme with a little company up in northern New York Troy, New York, called PlayNet. And we could mush this all together and start a new company. And I said, okay, that sounds cool. And so I had to raise the money, luckily I had a guy named Mark Serif. People say you could have never started AOL without Steve Case. I said, oh, I could easily start without him, but I could have never started out without Mark Serif. He was the guy down in the basement putting the wires together, you know. I can't run and make it run any faster.
Yeah. Like
Scotty. And so that all got cobbled together, and I told the people that put the money in it is, I'm going to run this for a year, but you know, we're going to have to find a real guy to do this, because I'm not a tech guy and I don't know anything about any of this. Well, I ended up running it for 11 years, and we changed the name. When we started this new company, it was called Quantum Computer Services, and it was out in Tyson's, and we changed the name in 1990 to, I remember the dates. Yeah, I started in 85. 1990 we changed the name to America Online, and in 92 we went public. So all of a sudden, and my lawyer one day said, do you still own any of those bars? And I said, yeah, I do. And especially the Exchange down, which is right below my office now on Pennsylvania Avenue. Yeah. And he says, well, you know, when people find out you own that, there's going to be a rash of accidents, because I was publicly rich, and people would read it. You know, the Washington Post would always, like they put your age in now. Yeah. Back then in the business, like they put your net worth in, and mine was public. Yeah. And they quit calling me a billionaire, thank God, because I'm not. I was one for a minute I was, but I'm not anymore. Nobody feels sorry for me. And you know, at 96, I decided to, you know, it was time to back away, and I get bored easily, and so I took one of our plane rides out to the West Coast. I told Steve I was going to make him my successor, because he lived and ate, and breathed it. I mean, he just loved it, and he was young enough, and of course my board was irate and didn't want to accept it, but I knew him well enough to say, well, that's what's going to happen, but, you know, one way or the other. So then they did the Time Warner deal, which they came. I could have stopped it because it was all my guys, but it looked like on paper, putting distribution, which was AOL, and content, Time Warner, together made sense on paper. Sure. If I'd ever met Jerry Levin, I would have never let that deal happen. And as it's turned out, I never failed to amuse myself by reminding Steve it's the worst merger in American corporate history. Luckily, I didn't get hurt by it too much.
So, to backtrack and to kind of sum up, being in the Army and being in the military academy, what kind of lessons, what did you understand about the world that helped you to become the success that you've been in the private sector?
Well, as I've told these scholars, you know what that is?
Yeah, explain your scholar program for a second. Yeah.
They're students at West Point, the Naval Academy, the Air Force Academy, and the Coast Guard Academy that come to town in the summer to do internships around various branches of the government. And I sponsor a program that brings, like today, they spent at the Library of Congress, and Jim Billington was really nice enough to put on a great show for us today. And I've had General Jim Jones and Wolf Blitzer. They had dinner with him the other night. And, I mean, there's just tomorrow, I think Friday, we have Bob Kimmett. So I set up it's actually my assistant, Nancy. Merritt really does everything. I just say okay.
Yeah.
But it's a program that's gone on for a few years now, where we, in conjunction with the academies, I sponsor these kids for these kinds of activities.
Yeah. So you still feel emotionally connected to the armed forces and the service that you...
Sure. Yeah. I spent 12 years West Point in the Army. It was a huge part of my life, and a very formational time in my life. I mean, whatever I am today, and as we all are, is this summation of how you were born and all your life experiences.
Do you have anything else that you want to talk about in terms of your military service that you want to share with us today?
Other than I enjoyed it, as I've said, I would have stayed in had there been more activity, and if they'd have promoted me to lieutenant colonel and gave me a battalion, I'd have stayed in, but they weren't going to do that. I mean, as it turns out, I mean, I can't think of a better path I could have taken, although serendipitous and Mr. Magoo-like as it was. It's been very, very good to me.
All right. Jim, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.